Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing our conversation about the gurus of self-realization. Let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Come into our hearts, make yourself known. Let your voice within us be so strong that all competing desires are simply put into the shadows. Help us to know that every longing that we have for love, for peace, for fulfillment, will find its fulfillment in our attunement with you. We are your children. Care for us as you do, as a divine mother. Keep us safe and close and bring us home to thee. Om, peace. Amen. In 1972, I write about it here in Light Bearer. And Swami Kriyananda sat down and he rewrote what was then called 14 Steps to Perfect Joy, which is now called The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, which was his course of lessons in the art and science of Raja Yoga, but that time it was newer. And he wrote the course first in like 1968, 69, into that period of time when he was teaching a great deal in the cities around San Francisco, driving up to Ananda Village on the weekend, and then he would write the next lesson and mail it out. It was to serve Master, but it was also in the context of raising the money to start Ananda, to build the first buildings at the seclusion retreat, to pay off the land. So after the land was purchased and Swamiji was living mostly full-time on the property, he went back to the lessons, and as he wrote, and as I say in that book, he said, even though the recipients of the lessons were kind enough to speak highly of the course, he said he was not satisfied with it for a very interesting reason. He said because it had not been a growing experience for him when he was writing it. He was in a hurry. He needed to get it done. He was under pressure. And it wasn't bad work. It just wasn't in the moment, vibrant, inspiring work. And so he said, for someone in his position who shares the teachings, he said it has to also be a growing experience for the one sharing, or else there's something that's slightly amiss in what's being done. So he sat down to rewrite the course without the pressure of time, and he looked at each aspect of the writing, which was the fundamentals of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and the fundamentals of meditation, and tried to think, how can I present this in some vibrant, in the moment way, instead of, and Swami didn't use this phrase, but it's something that I use for myself. Sometimes I'm talking in a way the same as what he's talking about. I'm learning as I speak. And sometimes I'm speaking what I call from memory, which is, I already know this and now I'm just saying it again. So Swami felt he taught that course from memory, and now he needed to teach it in the consciousness of the moment. And he wrote and said sometimes he would just come to a thought and he would have to stop and meditate. He said sometimes for an hour, sometimes for a day, sometimes he stopped for a whole month while he had to just stop and rethink it and come to it from a new perspective. I mean, that's always touched me very deeply as a person who spends a great deal of time sharing the teachings, which is that if it's not dynamic to my consciousness, the chances of it being dynamic to yours are greatly reduced. And it's a dance with Divine Mother that we all work with, and Swami worked hard to inspire us to follow. And what's interesting, and this is why I bring it up right now, is I recently acquired another picture of Sri Yukteswar and another picture of Lahiri, Because even for me, in my spiritual life, Christ, Babaji, Master, and Swamiji have been more central in my spiritual understanding. But because the inspiration was there to talk about each of these gurus, and I spent several days talking about Lahiri and also talking about Sri Yukteswar, and even at the time, I greatly enjoyed those conversations because ideas were coming together in the moment that I had never really put together before. See, inspiration is interesting. It's not as if, well, Swami Kriyananda is capable of learning something completely new in the moment. He can tap into superconsciousness, was able to tap into superconsciousness in a profound way that the rest of us are speaking for myself, I only aspire to. But somehow clarity comes to experience that's already there that hasn't been realized, is actually the right word. So perhaps even Swamiji's learning is the same, because it's all a matter of realization. I'm thinking about that now in the moment. But it was interesting to me. I was sitting in front of my little altar and I realized I need more prominent pictures of Lahiri and Sri Yukteswar, which I've had the altar there for years and it always contented me, but now they were missing. And when I came to Ananda in 1971, I was only just not quite 24, but I'd already been through a few experiences that were supposed to last longer than they did. College being an example, and quite a few others. Just I either flamed out quickly or I was a quick study. I don't know which one it was, but whatever it was, things did not hold hold me in the sense of feeding, nurturing, expanding in front of me. And when I came to Ananda, and really what I came was to be where Swami Kriyananda was. He could have been in an igloo in Antarctica, and that's where I would have been. I came because I felt he could teach me what I wanted to know, and having a place to live and a community and a retreat was just an unbelievably fabulous add-on benefit, of being in proximity to Swamiji. And of course, with all my heart, I hoped that it would be long-lasting and that it would not either disappoint me because it would turn out not to be what I hoped it would be, or that I would finish it. It wasn't like I expected any of those things to be true, but is the future going to be like the past? Well, emphatically, no is the answer. I mean, no, in the sense of getting through this quickly. I am now literally 50 years more, 51, since I met Swami Kriyananda, and my life took this entirely new direction. And last week, I learned completely new things about something as fundamental as the gurus of this path. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about this path because it's infinite. Where we're going is infinity. So by absolute definition, it's as Master answered the question, is there any end to evolution? No, we keep on expanding until we come to endlessness. So the capacity to just go deeper and deeper and deeper into these truths is one of the great promises of becoming a disciple. And we have literally all the time in creation to do that. But if we find at any point that our inspiration seems to be drying up, well, how does that chant go? If I find not, I will not blame the sea. I will blame my diving. And I'm not trying to blame. Yesterday's entire talk was about don't be ashamed and don't blame and don't feel like you're limited, but have confidence that the doors will keep opening. If we keep knocking, the doors will keep opening. And even seemingly insoluble limitations within ourselves will just dissolve. And the only word for it is grace. And that's why the deeper one gets on the path, really the more childlike we become in our relationship to it, because there's this illusion of there's an illusion of self, that is there at the beginning. We feel so important. We just feel so important. And spiritual progress is just the opposite of what we think it is. We sort of imagine it that we get more and more terrific. I have a theory about spiritual growth, which I think is completely fallacious. Even it's fallacious to my own experience, but it charms me and it liberates me, so I like it. So I'm going to share it with you and hope it helps you too. This is what I call the gospel according to Asha. And this is even a gospel that didn't even make it into the book, but here it is. And this one is that we actually never get any better, that we're always just as terrible and as incompetent and as confused and as absurd. We never change. It's that we stop caring. Because the whole concept of self just moves off into the periphery. And all that's left is this wonderful experience of grace. And the power of grace is so overwhelming that the fact that, I'm such a mess and such a marvelous fool for God, it just sort of becomes sweeter. And it's not a pretense. It's an actual realization. Swami Kriyananda, I've shared these thoughts with you, but they're apt for the moment. I loved it one day when Swami said to me, he was probably already in his 80s when he said this, and he was already living in India. I mean, it started when he moved to Italy, where the Italians understand saints, and they recognized Swami Kriyananda as a saint, and they revered him and treated him accordingly. In America, up until that time, and this was like 1998, is when he really went to be in Italy full time. Americans, we'd grown up with him, and Americans are just different. And it wasn't until Swami was living in Italy and Americans went to Italy and saw the reverence that they showed to Swamiji that it occurred to us that maybe we could respond a little differently. And then, of course, when Swami went to India, the Indians, and this is true for the Italians and the Indians, as distinct from Americans, is they have much more trust in their heart's intuitive perception. Americans actually have a lot of intuitive perception and a tremendous amount of heart, but we have this need to be shrewd. It's very important for Americans to be shrewd. So we will feel something marvelously intuitively from our hearts, and in the moment we'll surrender completely, but then we'll go home and we'll think about whether we're being shrewd or not. But as Swami said, Italians and Indians have gotten over that a long time ago. So when Swami went to India, I mean, literally, when he would come in and out of a hall, the devotees would have to form a human chain to hold people back. Otherwise, people would throw themselves at Swami's feet, and they would put their babies on Swami's feet, and they would put their heads on Swami's feet because of this deep and not unfounded belief that, any physical touch with such a great soul would have a transforming effect on their life. Think of the story of the woman in the life of Jesus who touched the hem of his garment and was instantaneously healed of an illness that had plagued her for 12 years. There's truth in that. That's why Master Yogananda touched the feet of Sri Yukteswar, even in 1935 when he went back. He bowed and touched his feet. But then, this is what Swami said to me. He said, the longer I live, he said, the more the myth of Kriyananda swirls around me. He said, well, in the middle of it, I'm just the same old fella, is how he put it. He used to describe himself with all the fanfare. And then he said, this little mouse, which was himself, would come out on stage, because it wasn't an affectation. It was just the way he felt. Because who we are and all the things that we think of ourselves, realization is to recognize that it's there. It just floats along. It's part of it. But who I am is quite different than that. So I'm going to segue into what I wanted to talk about today, what I planned to talk about today, which is another of the American characteristics that Master's teachings exemplify specifically. And this is the concept of cooperation. And everything that I've said until now is actually part of this. Um, all through the years that I was with Swamiji, he was always trying to find new ways to express these teachings. And he was often trying to find ways of expressing these teachings that didn't demand a, a reverential relationship with Master as a first step to being attracted to the teachings. He was always trying to find ways, and this was Master's own way of doing it. This was consistent with his guru, of just taking these teachings out to where everybody was standing so that they could benefit from this truth. And then once they began to benefit, they might be inspired to trace it back to the source. And Swamiji always felt it was very important that Ananda itself maintained a certain orthodoxy. Now, by that, I don't mean a conservative protectiveness, but a creative orthodoxy, a genuine attunement. So one of the concepts that Swami explored at great length, he never really followed through as much as he thought he might when he was talking about it, was cooperation. It was just interesting, just as a local color part of this. I don't know what year it was, but I think it must have been the late 90s. Four of us traveled with Swamiji through Europe and Switzerland, and we were through Italy and Switzerland. And we were on the train a lot, and it was while we were on the train that Swami had this idea of cooperation. So there was a tremendous amount of conversation about how cooperation is a fundamental principle of self-realization as Master taught it. Now, the theme of what I've been sharing here was from 1982. I mean, the years are not so important, but I happen to know them. When Swamiji gave that satsang in Los Angeles, where he talked about the unique American characteristics of Master's teaching, practicality, cooperation, and attunement with nature. And he talked about cooperation in that context as being in the American character, because when the settlers first arrived in this country and had to survive, the only way they could survive was by working together. And as things begin, so they continue. And so working together became woven into the very fabric of the American temperament. It would be interesting, actually, and I was just thinking about this now, cooperation was also one of the hallmark qualities of the native peoples who were here. And in fact, one of the confusing, utterly bewildering factors between the perception of the Native Americans and the way they saw the Europeans behave was that what they saw as the selfishness of the Europeans compared to the way that the Indian tribes took care of each other, the way they cared for their elders, and even, even into the present day, the American temperament admires when people have great wealth. And the traditional Native American culture feels that anybody who accumulates too much ought to be ashamed of himself, because what they value is generosity. And the purpose of prosperity is because it allows you to be tremendously generous. And there is no other purpose in it. To have a lot and just keep it is absolutely bewildering to them. I know Swami Kriyananda talked about, he talked about a conversation he had at the dinner table of his own family. This was long after he was dedicated to Master and to Ananda, but he was visiting his family. And his family, they weren't phenomenally wealthy, because the wealth they had was earned, and his father had a substantial career and had good karma, with investments and so on. But they were comfortably well off, and lived in Scarsdale and lived in Atherton, which are two of the highest income enclaves, in the US. But Swami was just sitting at the dinner table with his family, and just as a matter of conversation, remarked that how bewildering it was to Swamiji that a person would earn a lot of money and then just spend it on themselves. And he said the people at the dinner table, including his own mother, said, "Well, that's an unusual perspective." And later, when Swami was repeating the conversation to us, he said, what other possible perspective could there be? Because it was so natural to him. He literally earned millions of dollars in the course of his life and kept none of it. When he wrote his Material Success Through Yoga Principles course, which he wrote in 2004, after he moved to India, I had the opportunity to write some promotional material for it. And people kept asking, what's the difference between the course you've written and the prosperity courses that others have written? Swami's answer to that question was marvelous. He said, well, I'm the disciple of a great master. And to him, that was the complete answer. I extrapolated from that. And I'm just riffing today. You can see that. I riff every day, but this is what happens. Okay. What I ended up writing, and I'm quoting myself just because, well, because I learned something when I wrote it and I was impressed. And he's, let me just get this clear for a minute. This other odd thought occurs to me. Whenever I present an idea that impresses me that is not my own, first of all, I need you to know that I'm quoting Master or Swami if I am, because you need to know where the teachings come from. But even if it's just a really good idea, like Michael Singer, who happens to be a disciple of Master, who's done a wonderful work and has published 2 best-selling books. He had some really good ideas. And every time I quote him, I want you to know this is not mine. This was Michael. He was so good. So somehow that publicity I wrote seems like an alternate source to me than me. So every time I talk about this, I always say it comes from there. I don't have to tell you they were my own ideas. But I was in India. I was sitting in Swami's house in the basement when I was writing it. So I actually think he gave them to me. And so I always have this. These are not my ideas. So I always tell you that they came from that piece of promotional material. Okay, enough. Inside of Asha's, imagine living inside of this. I mean, you all just get it like it's exposed to you every once in a while. Have a little mercy. Think about being me. Okay, now moving right along. When I was trying to explain the difference between what the other courses were, and I think it was Robbins, whoever that man's name is, who was very, very popular at the time, Tony Robbins, is that most people write a prosperity course for material success and the perspective is from the material plane. And they teach you how to move the pieces around, which is very valid. And anybody who can learn to move the pieces around is tuning in on a higher level. But what Swami taught basically came from the Himalayan masters. And so it was telling you how to operate on the material plane from the spiritual level. And that's why Swami says, well, that's the difference, is that I'm the disciple of a great master. And he wasn't saying, I am a disciple of a great master. He was saying the source of these teachings is entirely different. And I had fun also saying that when the English came to India, India was an extraordinarily wealthy country. And over the course of several hundred years, England became a very wealthy country, and India was gradually impoverished. You know, the jewels were taken off the walls of the Taj Mahal, literally, and what do you know, appeared in the English crown. I mean, these are true things. These are the things that happened. But I said the true wealth of India was hidden in the Himalayas, because the true wealth is the understanding of where power comes from. And it was hidden in the Himalayas to be kept. Well, I mean, that was the Kali Yuga. It was Kali Yuga, but it was also to be kept from those who hadn't earned the right to have it. But now it's a new age, and now these teachings can be delivered because consciousness itself is rising, and we're able to do this. So coming back to, let me think now where I was with this, and also material efficiency is the gift that the West is giving to the East, and specifically that America and India combined. India has this ancient tradition of spiritual truth. America has specialized in this material efficiency. And cooperation, you see, coming to there, cooperation and practicality, the 2 things we were talking about, are 2 of the principles that are essential for material efficiency. And there's nothing spiritual about being poor. I mean, there's a tremendous spirituality in being detached and being indifferent to one's physical conditions, not because of a lack of capacity to influence them, but because of a preoccupation with other realities. And when I was talking about Sri Yukteswar, he exemplifies that, and Master included it in Autobiography of a Yogi, so we would know. Master wanted to bring to Sri Yukteswar more material comfort or clarity or upliftment, and Sri Yukteswar just, tossed it aside. Why bother? He said, my little rug is clean and dusted. My sleeping space is fine. My meditation space is fine. And then he just peered out at the collapsing ashram around him and said, it doesn't make any difference. It was not because he couldn't. It was because he had transcended the need to. But the example that's needed now is a balanced combination of these two realities. And the prosperity of America is to a large extent based on our ability to work together. And again, working together is something that as an American we take for granted. And when we have traveled to other countries where it is not we, and I use anything that Ananda does anywhere on the planet, I call we. It's not exactly the royal we. I don't know. I would like to think of it as the spiritual we, because it's my family, and so it's done by me as far as I'm concerned. It's my it's not done by me, but well, it is in that sense. It's done by my brothers and sisters, and everything I do I feel is theirs, and everything they do I feel is mine. It's completely reciprocal. But we found that we took for granted the fact that people would want to work together, that people would respect each other and want to, and we met these these tiny little enclaves of familial loyalty and regional loyalty. And I remember just even at the beginning, now we've sort of passed through this a little bit, but when Italians from Rome realized we expected them to move to Assisi because that's where Ananda was, we literally got responses like, but I'm a Roman. And to the American mind, it was, but I'm a Roman. I live in Rome. But it was a complete thought. And we also meet this very hierarchical, I'm in charge. I'm the one who should do it. And also something that Gandhi had to fight against strongly in India was my servants will do this. And this is amusing, and it was just a question of cultural misunderstanding. In India, when we started, we would have what was an American tradition. We'd have a work day. Everybody comes, in their scruffy clothes, and they pick up the sponges and the brooms or the hammers and the nails, and we make our place better like that. Well, we would have these work days, and our Sangha members would be so enthusiastic about it, and they would send their maids. And they would feel they had participated because they'd given up their servant for the day. And this is what Gandhi had to work with. And Gandhi insisted on no servants and made everybody do the work with their own hands. To Americans, it's like, we just don't even think like this because we cooperate together. We all just do our part. We don't think in terms of hierarchy. And so this is a very important spiritual principle as well as a magnetism issue, which is why I keep mentioning Gandhi. Gandhi also knew that his country, India, was being crippled by this lack of willingness for us to all be in it together. And this is the power of spiritual family, that we're all in this together, that the welfare of one is the welfare of all. And it is a uniquely American situation, both because of the pioneers and, interestingly, because of the native peoples. So I think we're going to talk about cooperation more tomorrow, because I haven't even gotten back on the train to Switzerland, and there's a lot more that can be said. God bless you.